Yeah, so let me go online here. Actually, there's this poster that the Bible Project has. If you go to their thebibleproject.com and you look up Esther, you'll find a video, and right under the video there's a thing called poster. For each book of the Bible, they actually have a poster. And the reason I like using these posters, you guys know me. But
Yeah, they're
the
really nice.
Yeah, they are nice. And the what this one I really like it, especially for Esther, because you can see how parallel this construction is. So if you were here for the our study on Daniel, we know that a big part of chunk of that book was what they call a chiasm. A chiasm is sort of like where you have these so if you look at the first and last chapter, say in this book, they kind of match each other. The second part matches these part, they all kind of match, and then you have a centerpiece to it. It's kind of like if you imagine a hamburger, you have a center patty, and then you have cheese on the outside, and then you have a lettuce on both sides until you finally get to the bread. And chiastic structure is very common in the Old Testament, especially, but it's also used in the New Testament. There's a big chiasm in Revelation. John likes John the Apostle likes chiasms, or like chiasms to put in his work. This one is one of the most parallel constructions that I've actually seen. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I just wanted to, sorry to interrupt. Where did you get these posters? I know you mentioned the website, but I didn't
Okay.
grab my pen
Yeah,
quick enough.
they're if it's bibleproject.com. So let me zoom in here. This is created by Bible Project, and they have a whole bunch of resources there. They like to do videos. I was thinking of showing this video, but I think you should I don't want to put their video on something that I'm recording.
Right.
Sometimes I do, but but in this case, I'll just use their poster. They also sent me a big coffee book because I've sent them some money over the years, and they have a poster of each one of the books in the Bible. Um,
I think that would
so
really help me because, I don't usually read an entire book of the Bible at one time. So sometimes when you pick it back up, it's like, this would definitely help. So thanks for
yeah,
showing me that.
it gives you kind of like a big picture idea of it. So I think I don't know if I'm not going to go as tediously through the Book of Esther as I would some other books, because it's not that the language is that dense or anything. It's a little bit more lighthearted actually. It's the whole style of it is um it's kind of almost like satirical or something. It pokes fun at the king, and it does a couple things here. But here at the introduction of Esther, um, and I'll show you guys a timeline of kind of like where this takes place. If you know the the Babylonian exile, so if you're talking about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were dragged off to Babylon, that was about 100 years before this story. And what happened is that the Babylonian Empire was overthrown by the Persian Empire, and a lot of the Jews went back home because Cyrus had made a decree that they could go back home after, and this was all prophesied in places like Jeremiah, that they could that they would be going home after 70 years. So that happened, but not all of them went back to Jerusalem. Some of them stayed in the Persian Empire, which had taken over, and Esther is among them. Her and her cousin Mordecai, actually. So there's this Jewish community in the Persian capital. The capital at that time is called Susa, and I'll show you where that is on the map. It's of course, in modern day Iran. The empire before them was the Babylonian Empire. Of course, Babylon was in modern day Iraq. So it's all kind of in that area. So you have the main characters who are Mordecai, and he's older, but he's taking care of his cousin. Um, they would say, like the Bible Project calls her his yeah, he's kind of acting like an uncle to her. Um, and then you have the king of Persia. Now this is in the story, his name is Ahasuerus, but his Greek name is Xerxes. So if you ever saw the film 300, that was kind of like a highly stylized version of a battle that Xerxes was at. The bald-headed Xerxes is fighting these 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae. And but that's about this king. It's this figure in history. And then you've got this sneaky guy named Haman. He's kind of the villain of the story. And there's a couple curious facts about this. One is that God is never mentioned. God is never mentioned in this book in the Bible. And there was even a little bit of, I would say, difficulty for this to get into the Jewish Old Testament. The Jewish Old Testament, it's not like you had like a codified, Jewish Old Testament even in Jesus's day. That kind of came together in in several hundred years after Christ. But and you couldn't just walk into a synagogue and have all of the scrolls, or one big book that you would call the Old Testament or the Tanakh. Maybe you had all of the scrolls in the temple in Jerusalem, since that was the capital, and of course the temple. But if you walked into a synagogue, they might have a scroll of Isaiah and a scroll of Genesis, or whatever else. But there were some Jewish communities who did not have Esther. Of course, the Sadducees didn't have Esther, and neither did Qumran. So for those of you who are familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have every single book there with the Dead Sea Scrolls that they found. That's community that existed about 150 years before Christ, except for Esther. They didn't have Esther, and maybe part of it was because it seemed almost like a secular book to them or something. Or the Essenes who lived at Qumran were super conservative in a way, I would say. But the fact that God is never mentioned directly kind of invites you into the story to look for God's activity within the story. So, you get into the story and you find that there's a lot of quote unquote coincidences, and you have ironic reversals, and you can definitely see God's hand in there. So it's kind of like if you took a story or a segment of your life and you look back at it and you go, God was there the whole time, orchestrating things is almost the way that the book is presented. You don't have any passage that says, and the Lord said this and the Lord guided this, or anything. It's a little bit you just kind of have to read between the lines, but I don't think you have to read very hard between the lines to see God in action in the story. There's a little bit of moral ambiguity. There's a lot of drinking, sex, and murder. It's like a soap opera, And there's also violations of Torah commands. These are people who aren't living in Jerusalem. I'm not really sure about like what the Bible Project here means by, Torah commands being broken, other than Esther's marrying a Gentile, but she can't really, she's really got no say in it. And I think that there's some issues there with what Mordecai is doing. But the point is that despite the exile, that they're not living in or near Jerusalem, and God's absence, in other words, and Israel's moral compromise, God has not abandoned his promises. He's keeping his promises to his people. So I'm going to summarize kind of this story using the pictures here, because I think it kind of you start off with a King Xerxes or Ahasuerus throwing a big party, and he's saying, bring out the queen Vashti, because he wants to show her off in front of all these other officials. He's showing off his kingdom, and he wants to show off the queen, but she feels like she's just being made an object or something, and she refuses to come out. And so the officials that are with him say, you know what, this is bad news, because now our wives are going to disrespect us, and this is going to go throughout the kingdom. You've got to take action. So they said, make a law and a decree that all men are be the masters of their house. And so, and in the meantime, have a pageant for a new queen. So Esther comes on the scene, and she's a young Jewish girl, and I think she's 20 at the time, around then. And I don't know how they figure that out, but in any case, she becomes queen. And as kind of a side story that's kind of stuck in here, what happens is that Mordecai, he overhears a plot to kill the king, and he tells Esther about it, and well, the king finds out about it, and this is kind of put, like on hold. This is going to come up later on in the story, but he basically saves the king's life, because he ruined an assassination plot against the king. Now, there's a guy named Haman he's going to be the villain of the story, and he's what they call an Agagite. And next week we're going to get into exactly where that word Agag comes from. This is he's actually a traditional enemy of God's people from the Amalekites. They're from the Canaanites. So from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, God had told them, go in there and get rid of the Amalekites, and Saul didn't really complete that job, and David tried to. Saul was supposed to kill the king. That king's name was Agag, right? And so in a way, what happens in this story is that there's some unfinished business from centuries before. So that probably explains why Mordecai won't bow down to him. There's a decree that, he's made the chief prince, this Haman is, but Mordecai won't bow down to him, and that this really irks him. So what he does, instead of just going after Mordecai, is that he tries to get a law passed where all of the Jews are going to be killed. This isn't just in Susa. This is throughout the empire, which is a huge empire. So we're talking the wholesale slaughter of all the Jewish people within that empire, including in Jerusalem and everything. So this king is being portrayed as like somebody who's always being bamboozled, and he's always being influenced by somebody. So they rolled a dice called the Purim, and the dice is just basically there to decide when this is going to happen, to choose a day, right? And then they have a banquet. Now, Esther, the news gets out, and then basically Mordecai says to Esther, who knows if you haven't been, that you aren't here for a time such as this. You've got to say something to the king, or try to do something to save our people. But in the meantime, they know that, like, when she does that, if she goes to the king uninvited, she could get killed, right? You don't just appear in front of you. She always has to rely on the king calling her. But she goes, okay, well, I'm going to try this, and if I die, I die. She doesn't know if this is going to work or not, but she's in a position to actually do something. So what her plan is that she first has a banquet, and she has a banquet with the king and this Haman guy. And right after this, Haman gets out, and he's all drunk from this little party, and he sees Mordecai, and he's angry, so he's going to have him hung on a gallows. What that actually means in that day and time is that he's going to have him impaled on a stake, right? Um, but then what happens is that the king, he can't sleep one night, so he has all of these records, the king's records, read to him, something really boring to help him fall asleep, I guess. But he hears about this story again where Mordecai has saved his life by foiling that plot, right? That murder plot. So wherever that got mentioned. And he's like, oh yeah, I forgot, did I ever do anything for that guy? And they're like, no. So he goes, you know what? Why don't you let's have him paraded out on a horse, and everybody's got to honor him. So the person who he gets to parade him around on the horse is Haman, which is comedy, right? Haman's got to actually parade the guy that he wants to kill around on a horse. So this is where the story pivots, because now the honor is going from Haman to Mordecai. And then what happens is that Esther and Mordecai plan to reverse the decree. And so you have Esther's second banquet, and she basically gets up in the middle of that party and goes, this guy is trying to kill all of my people. And, the king doesn't even know that she's, a Jew, and he's just putting it together. And he's like, wait, what? Like this Haman, got me to sign a decree that's going to kill all of my wife's people, and so he gets mad at Haman, and he goes and has him he has him impaled on that same stake that that Haman was going to skewer Mordecai on. So Mordecai actually he has a decree to save the Jews now. Now the law that was passed originally was that that everybody would attack that wanted to attack the Jews. All of their enemies could freely attack them on the day that they rolled the dice and set a date for it, right? And but so they made an amendment to that decree and said, the Jews can do whatever they want to defend themselves, and they can take up arms. And so on the 13th of Adar is when they had rolled the dice on all the Jews can defend themselves. By the way, Purim is it's a Jewish festival to this day. And I heard it kind of looks like Mardi Gras or something like that. It's kind of wild. And then what happens is that you have Mordecai. Mordecai becomes elevated after this. Haman is dead. And then at the end, Mordecai, it's all about Mordecai's greatness. So the way that you have this parallel construction is that you have the king of Persia's greatness across from Mordecai's greatness at the beginning and the ends of the story. Sandwiched between that, you have Haman elevated, and now you have across from that, you had Mordecai elevated right before the end there, where you had Haman's decree to kill the Jews. It's mirrored by Mordecai's decree to save the Jews, where you had Esther and Mordecai plan to reverse the decree. You have Esther and Mordecai plan to reverse the decree. So that's exactly parallel almost. And then you have the banquet, and then you have the second banquet here. In between that, you have the you have Esther and Mordecai's plan to reverse the decree. Yeah, I already mentioned that. And then that pivot point is where the story pivots. So it's a parallel construction. Here's the putting up of the gallows, only he ends up on it. So when you look up that poster, you can see how the story was made parallel. So let's go. Here's a timeline. It's got actually a lot more information on it than I'm going to talk about. So if you remember where we were in Daniel months ago, that would be kind of like right here. So Daniel is living up until this time right here. Right here is where Darius the Mede comes in. So this is right where that story about Daniel and the writing on the wall, that's right at this point over here. And you have the fall of Babylon to Cyrus. So Daniel serves Darius the Mede, um, yeah, and he also serves under Cyrus, um, and I don't know how far into it he does. But Daniel's alive, like, and he's an old man. And way back here is where he got dragged off to Babylon. You have all those other stories, but if you look at the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah, those are the recordings of the things that happened under the decrees that Cyrus made to rebuild Jerusalem and those sorts of things. So Ezra and Nehemiah are about this, mostly about this time right here. You also have the rebuilding of the temple. Zerubbabel begins the rebuilding of the temple here under Cyrus. You have Cambyses, who's not as well known to us, but you have a couple things. You have, these are some of the historic events that happened. Temple building is resumed because there was a pause. It was really difficult to kind of get the building, to get the temple built. There's a lot of opposition back in Palestine and everything. So finally, you have Darius the first that comes in. He kind of gets things really, he'd gotten things rolling again. Finally, the temple's finished here under Darius the first, and it's originally dedicated there. And you have this, so that story, then it goes into Xerxes, right? That story about Thermopylae, where Xerxes loses to the Spartans, and Thermopylae is in 480 BC, which is right here. And then you have Esther chosen in the next year, or it's 1 or 2 years right after that. So Xerxes has just suffered that defeat not that long before Esther is chosen, and where this story takes place. So let's go now to PowerPoint. So Esther part 1, here's a painting of looks medieval, of the party that King Xerxes is about to throw. If you look at modern day Iran, right here in the city of Shiraz, right outside of there, you'll find kind of like where the this all takes place. Susa's gonna be right outside of Shiraz. If you zoom in, you have the Palace of Xerxes. Here's the Ulai Canal. That might ring a bell because Daniel 9, the vision that, Daniel 8, his vision in Daniel 8 between the ram and the goat takes place right at the Ulai Canal. So Daniel does hang out in this area under the Persian Empire, because it is the capital city, and he's become an official there. So Daniel was there. There is a citadel of Susa, which is where Xerxes lived, but I couldn't find good information to see if this building is the exact same building or not. It looks too new. That's what I was thinking, or it's been restored or something else. So that's kind of like maybe go, I don't know about that. So, but it is in the right place generally, I guess. It is in Susa. There's a mausoleum to Daniel. There's a kind of traditional burial place there, where there's another story where in Iran where Daniel, there was two cities that were fighting, two towns that were fighting over him, one on one side of the river and one on the other side of the river. And finally, what they decided is to kind of put his coffin, like hung from a bridge between the two places. But you know, who knows? On the inside of the mausoleum, it kind of looks like this, and it's according to the people around Susa, or, you know, his where his body is. This is the Persian Empire that Xerxes is in control of. So you can see it goes Libya and Egypt, you know, up here. You know, Jerusalem would be right up here. Here's Turkey. It goes northern Arabia, Meshach, also, you know, where you would have Magog and Togarmah, all of those places are in Asia Minor. This would be Cush and Put, which would be more modern day Egypt and uh, Sudan and Libya. Um, and it goes all the way to India. So like this is a big area. Um, so chapter 1. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, that's Xerxes, okay? Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia, which is Kush, over 127 provinces. In those days so this is not Ethiopia that we think of like way down south in Africa. We're talking Kush. I think this is more like Egypt and Sudan, Libya, that kind of that area. Over 127 provinces. And in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and his servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. So he's spending half a year just showing off his kingdom to a bunch of nobles and governors and you know, uppities. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the Susa the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. I don't think great and small includes like just people from the street and whatever. That's like great and small in terms of government, you know. So I don't think you go into the garden of the king's palace unless you're in government, or you know, you serve in some kind of a capacity, you're a leader of something. So this garden of the king's palace, just so you know, the word that we get paradise, well, paradise comes straight from the Persian language, and we get it through the Greek paradiso, but it's just a kind of like it's a transliteration from paradiso in the Persian language. So, and the idea, it literally means walled enclosure, but it means that there's a garden or some sort of a lush place inside. So the idea is if you were in a paradise, you were in the seat of power, kind of like in the Edenic, you know, like nice place where people rule from, right? So that's kind of the idea. You have the Garden of the King's Palace, which is that idea is you get it in the Garden of Eden because Adam and Eve are kings and queens, and God is ruling the earth with them, you know, or and through them. So it has those connotations. So there were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods, marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. But I don't know how comfortable a golden couch or a silver couch would be, but yeah, pretty lavish stuff here. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was in accord to this edict. There is no compulsion. In other words, you don't have to drink. You can drink as much as you want to. For the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. So he's in the garden, and she's in the palace giving a party to the women. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, so he's drunk, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, and 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus. So the way that this reads, somebody pointed out, would sound like, these are like more Persian sounding names, and for the Jewish listener, might actually kind of sound comical. It's kind of like if I was reading a story to you about, like a bunch of Irish people, and said, and Connor and Kiefer and Connell and Ian and Liam, all showed up. It's all these typical names. I should say here that also that there are a lot of there's a number of Persian words used in the story, not just the names, but there's Persian words in the story which kind of bring the listener into the story to feel like they're there. It kind of shows you a little bit when this book had to be written, because Persian would have been like a dead language shortly after the Persian Empire to the Jews, because the Greeks came next and they Hellenized everybody. They just made everybody speak Greek. So it couldn't have been too long. The latest that this could have been written would be not long after the Persian Empire. So he gets them, and he in their presence, and he asks them to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. So he's just going to show her off. It's a bunch of drunk guys, basically. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, the wise men are the wise men that come from the east, the Magi, they trace all the way back to Daniel. So Daniel is one of the wise men. That whole collection of that society was passed down into the Persian Empire, and then the Persian Empire kept that tradition alive even into Jesus's time. And so it's probably a little bit of a connection with the wise men of Daniel and the wise men that you see in Matthew. The king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure towards all who were versed in the law and judgment, the men next to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media. So remember, this is the Median Persian Empire. Persians are Iranis, and then Medians are what do you call it?
Newscasters.
No. Yeah, fake news. No, Media is the Medes were the Kurds. The Kurds are the Medes. But the Persians became way more powerful than the Medes. So anyway, the princes of Persia and Media who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. In other words, yeah, they, like you don't really see the king's face as like some average Joe, not normally. If you did, then it was probably trouble, unless he's out on the streets or something. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs. So what should we do with her?
I think when it says who saw the king's face, I think that implies a relationship.
Yeah, yeah. So you could see somebody face to face, right? Exactly. So they had the privilege to do that. Otherwise, you weren't allowed to just go see the king,
Like, because even the queen says she'd be put to death.
Yeah, yeah. Even the queen can't just, she's got to go by like an appointments. Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath and plenty. In other words, this is news that doesn't have to travel very far, because all of these guys' wives were in the building right there, because she's throwing a party in the palace, remember? So she's probably got their wives and who knows, maybe daughters over there is throwing a party, and they're like, "This is not good news. She did this right now, and now all of them are going to get an attitude." That's their fear, If it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed. Remember, you saw this in Daniel too, right? That the laws of the Persians and Medes, once you wrote it, even the king couldn't reverse it. That's why Daniel ends up in the lion's den, even though once, you know, King Darius finds out, like, wait, he's in there for the wrong reasons. He couldn't just save Daniel out of it. There's a lot of parallels, by the way, between this story and Daniel and Joseph. So it's again, you're going to have a king here who's like, wait, what kind of a law did I sign? And I can't repeal it. And in the case of Daniel, the king, really hopes that Daniel will make it through, and then he does, and then he kills all the people who made him sign that law. And here you're also going to get the same sort of situation where King Xerxes is going to kill the guy who had him sign that law. So very similar to Daniel. They said, let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. Give it to somebody else. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed through all his kingdom, for it is vast, and we just saw on the map how big it is, right? All women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. So they think that this is going to have repercussions all the way, all through the society, that they are, all through the empire. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. Now, this isn't like saying, oh, this was the right thing to do, okay? Because part of what's going on here too is that this king is sort of, he's very passive in a way. He's always having other people like telling him what he should sign or do, and that sort of thing. Now he is in charge, but there's an element here that's kind of like, man, he's just kind of like going by, people giving him advice, But he sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, because there's a lot of languages here, and to every people in his own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. The Persians were not like the Greeks. The Greeks got everybody to speak Greek. The Persians were a lot more liberal in their in how much they let other communities have their own language and traditions and people and everything. So they unified the Persian Empire in a different way from the Greeks. They didn't have something like Hellenization, and they didn't trample on people as hard as, like say the Romans did or anything. So you have a very multicultural empire under the Persians. Actually, I was going to quit here, but I think we'll go on. So after these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. So this is actually quite a while later. Okay, so this is jumping, I think it's jumping like a couple years forward in time, or a year or something. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom." I just thought of it. It can't be, it's probably like a year later, but it can't be 2 years later. Never mind. Okay, say then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics," it's kind of bad translations, "unctions be given them." So it's not like they're going to put on makeup and that's going to make them beautiful over time.
Make them smell better.
Yeah, the unctions are, yeah, exactly. It's they would be steeping themselves and in these oils and stuff like myrrh. And then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. Remember that he's a Benjamite. Okay, this is the same tribe that Saul's from. And that's going to be important later in the story. But he's a Benjamite who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, who King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. Now, the wording of this here in English almost makes it sound like Mordecai himself was dragged off into Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, but that was like 100 years ago. So I'm pretty sure that it's referring to the family that was dragged off to Babylon. That's kind of like how he ends up in Persia, is because years ago his family had been dragged off to Babylon. He was bringing up Hadassah. Hadassah means it's a word that's derived from myrtle tree. Myrtle tree is a fragrant tree, so it kind of fits the story because she's going to be spending a lot of time with unctions and she's beautiful and all that kind of stuff. That is Esther. Esther is actually her Persian name, right? It's from the goddess of Ishtar. So she's named after, and Mordecai himself is from the Babylonian god named Marduk. So Mordecai is a Babylonian name. Esther is a Persian name. Her Jewish name is Hadassah. The daughter of his uncle. So yeah, she's his first cousin. For she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. So Toar Yefeh. This is the same kind of like wording that it uses when Joseph was saying that Joseph was handsome, that he was nice to look at and all that. So again, it's that parallel of Joseph is good looking. He's been taken, and he's brought into kind of like the among royalty and all those sorts of things. So his drama kind of unfolds in similar circumstances, right? And they end up being right there, right next to the seat of power. So she's lovely to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Now, you know, so Mordecai raised her. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him. That's Haggai. So the eunuch who's in charge of all of them, he really likes her. Pleasing again, like in his eyes, like Joseph is pleasing in the eyes. So I am going to bring this up. There is a thing. There's a theme in the Bible that that starts all the way back with Eve. Actually, it starts with God saying when he makes creation that he saw that it was good, and he saw that it was very good. So right after that, story, you have the story of Adam and Eve looks at the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and she sees that it is good, and she takes. And you see this repetitive wording in the Hebrew Bible about people seeing things and taking them. Like the Joseph, Potiphar's wife saw that he was handsome and she's trying to take him. David saw that Bathsheba was beautiful and he decides to take her. It's that seeing and taking that's always kind of got that. But then that kind of rhythm gets interrupted sometimes where you see seeing and giving. So like when Moses's mother sees that he is a beautiful child, it's the same words again, like tov, and what she does is that she puts him in a basket and then and does something. So she gives him up. She sees, but then she gives him up. Abraham sees Abraham sees the slave girl and he takes her, but then later on he sees the three men and then he gives. He sees. So it kind of gets turned on his head sometimes so that you can know when somebody is like they're acting selfishly, seeing and taking, just like Eve did, or the seeing and giving, where it's kind of like they see, but now they're going to act like in a godly way. So here, this is kind of like he sees that that she's beautiful, but he's going to provide her with all these kinds of things. So he quickly provided her with cosmetics, unctions, and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace. So she's got 7 women attending her, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. So yeah, she is in the harem. Esther had not made known to her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. Wait a minute. 9, am I missing something? Yeah, I must have. Okay. Esther just hadn't made known that she was a Jew, basically. And I don't know where that's. Yeah, no, it's there. Sorry, I misunderstood it. Esther had not made known her people or her kindred. In other words, she hadn't revealed that she was an Israelite or a Jew. For Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. I'm not really sure why. And every day Mordecai walked in the front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. So Mordecai is actually, he's in the king's service. This is how he ends up at the gate, and he's not privy to to being in the inner circle, but he is actually an official of some kind. Mordecai is. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, so they were all taking turns having sex with him or sleeping with them, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In other words, sometimes, the eunuch there, he had like all this stuff like bracelets and earrings and dresses or whatever else, like that they could bring with them. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. So she would go from one of the candidates to being a concubine at that point. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. So, if he doesn't like you, you'll never see him again, but you'll always be a concubine, I guess. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, here I put it, from Marduk, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except for what Haggai, the king's eunuch who had charge of the women, advised. So she's like, I don't know what to bring. Just show me what to bring. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther. See, I think these are like months that are said in Persian, not said in Hebrew. That's kind of like one of those words, I think. I'm not sure. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. Again, another party, It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. So everybody gets a tax break, Oh, okay. So that's all I had put down.
That's probably a good place to stop.
It is kind of a good place to stop because next is going to be the story of Mordecai.
Listen, somebody else thought.
Yeah, no. This is where Mordecai is going to foil that assassination plot.
We lost John.
Yeah, we did. Anyway, so we'll continue with the story next week, and we're going to be going back into I think it's I'm going to be referring to the story in 1 Samuel 15 if you want to take a look at that. In any case, look for the story where Saul disobeys and doesn't wipe out King Agag. But we'll be discussing that next time. But it's an important part of this story that sometimes it's caught, sometimes it's not. Anybody with any questions or observations?
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's once you go, oh, this part in Iraq, this part in Iran, then it's not too far from Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting how the stories parallel to other stories.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of that,
Yeah.
Sounds very much like, you read.
And then you're talking about too, repeating of the words
Mm-hmm.
and others of the stories, and they're the same. And
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's these there's all these it's amazing like how much you get like Pharaoh ends up being second in command, Daniel ends up being second in command, Esther's queen, their looks are mentioned. Daniel, his looks are mentioned, right? Because the
similarities to Joseph.
Yep.
Yeah.
Joseph was good looking. It's also not much is said about like her having an excellent spirit, but I think it's kind of implied,
Well, she must have been doing something right if everybody liked her.
Yeah. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I know we mentioned that when the king got the advice that Queen Vashti should be, basically abandoned. What did
Mhm.
they do for that? I remember you said there was a year that passed before the actual actions took place. Were they just
Yeah.
partying for a whole year or something?
No, 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 no. Like it's probably just like business, you know.
Okay.
I mean,
I
you
was
know,
just
he's
wondering
got
because usually I see a king make an order or think something is pleasing to him and it just happens immediately, you know?
yeah, I think, you know, I think that immediately they it looks like they made the decree, but I'm not really sure. Esther becomes queen like not until like a year or two later. Well, no, I take that back. I'm not really sure. And I've read it in a couple commentaries that it was kind of a while later. But you know, it's official business in between. It's just like even before the party starts. I mean, he's coming back from a big military campaign where he's just been defeated, and then he's got other stuff to do, you know. So it's probably like, and because
Yeah.
you're also thinking like, wow, he's totally going to forget about this assassination plot. Now this guy saved his life, but I'm sure there's a lot of distractions between partying, getting drunk, and running a kingdom and getting into wars.
And he couldn't send emails or anything. So I
Yeah,
guess
it looks like
things
that king was
things
easy
took a while.
persuaded to do anything.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What did you say?
It sounds like that King Xerxes was easy to persuade.
It seems like I think that they're playing with that idea in the story. There's the way that the story is lined out, and not that I don't know Hebrew, but I've seen some commentary about like how um even if you look at what Purim is, like at least the way that it's celebrated now, it's kind of a strange thing because it's not like one of those feasts that's commanded in in Exodus or Leviticus or something like that, you know. Obviously that's way before then, but it's like one of those things. I heard it's a little bit of a wild party. It reminds some people of Mardi Gras or something like that. And I wish Aaron was here because I think Aaron's was there during Purim or something. And some of the it's kind of a wild thing. The whole story is a little wild to me just because, man, you know, like this is the most threatening thing that they've ever gone through in a way. I mean, I can't think of like any part of the Bible where a kingdom had decided that they were just gonna wholesale kill all of the Jews, you know? So I mean, we have the book of Esther, but then nothing else about that really, you know, unless, and this is something else I'm going to get to, unless Ezekiel 38 and 39 is about that. And a lot of people would be like, what? Um, but I'll tell, you know, I'm not going to be dogmatic about that or anything, but I, I, I still have to kind of like vet the information that I have on that and see, you know, but right now, I think that Ezekiel 38 and 39 could be about this war. One of the things is that every nation mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39, in Ezekiel 38, is in the Persian Empire. All of those areas. So it's like, wow, okay. And there's some other things like that. Unwalled villages, the whole thing with unwalled villages, you read about in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zechariah. So, and the loot that they're going after is silver, gold, and livestock. And what had happened is that the Jews had gone back when they were told rebuild. They were given a bunch of silver, gold, and livestock, a lot of livestock, so that they could do the daily sacrifices. So this was all being paid for by the Persian government. And there was obviously some jealousy involved with all of that too, because people in the area didn't like that, you know. So it all seems to kind of like coincide there.
Yeah, like now.
Huh?
Like now.
Yeah. Well, there's no silver, gold, or
No, I know, but they're not getting along.
yeah, you know. So it's all this a powder keg over there in it.
Yeah.
So So anyway, yeah, there's some, there's a lot of like connections there to be made. Story simple enough. Yeah, get on the website, look at the video
Okay.
too. You know, I like the way that they explain things. You know,
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
All right.
And
Have a.
Definitely.
We'll see you soon.
I'll see you guys this weekend. Oh, Charles, I can't hear you. You're
Yeah.
Sorry, I
muted.
said, thank you. I'm saving the link. I'm putting that link in my favorites, the Bible Project.
Yeah, they got great videos. I love their little 7-minute videos that explain a whole lot of, you know. If you're gonna study a book in the Bible, just they'll give you like the bird's eye view. And they do it. I'm a visual person, so it helps me a lot, you know.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
Yeah,
thought
they're
I was
cartoons.
pretty smart.
Helpful.
Thought I
Yeah.
was smart until I started studying the
Good
Bible.
The Bible is like overwhelmingly deep. Yeah, I know what you feel like.
All right. We'll see you
All right.
guys.
All right,
Right.
see you guys. See you
Take
this
care,
weekend.
bye.
Bye.